political coverage. It can be tough to ignore the juicier stories, though. Perhaps today, the birth of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's son, or the news on Friday that Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is engaged to her partner, Clark Gayford. Anyway, Liam here points to Ms Ardern's pregnancy last year as an example. Some used it to call out the Prime Minister's capacity to lead. Others went over the top in their well-wishing and interest in the child. And he also recalls the I'm a Key Person T-shirts that became somewhat popular during John Key's leadership. Around the panel, Nikki, do you worry about this? Do you think that personality has crept a little too much into New Zealand politics?
Oh, I really don't. I don't think it's a huge issue. I mean, he's asking people not to be human. I mean, it's human to be interested in these kinds of things. And I do think actually there's a distinction between the Prime Minister's pregnancy and something like the engagement or other things. You know, I mean, her being pregnant was a significant moment, not just as a celebrity politician story, but as a really important moment in history.
And that's why it factored on the world stage too, where they had no relationship with their Prime Minister, but they saw something significant.
But isn't it a slippery slope? We're going down the presidentialism of the American style of politics.
It's never going to be like that here. We can go down and see, we can bump into Jacinda in the supermarket practically here. You know, I mean, it's never going to be the way it is overseas.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. Look, I understand the dangers of populism, as long as there is not robust analysis of what they're doing in their core job. But I think the problem that we have here is the accessibility via the media these days. It's not necessarily a problem, it can be a positive, that every person out there, whether or not they like a politician or they dislike them, has an ability to feel like they've got a personal kind of connection in some way, or to they think that they know that politician in a way that perhaps they didn't years ago. But this isn't just now. It's not just John Key and it's not just Jacinda Ardern phenomenons. Remember when David Lange was Prime Minister, particularly in the first term before things started to, the pressures of office came in, that he had an interest, for example, in motor racing. That was big news. People saw the big Prime Minister sitting in a racing car having a go around Pukekohe racetrack.
And wasn't it also David Lange that got the makeover?
He had his stomach stapled, and suddenly lost a lot of weight.
But also the hair makeover was quite
the hair makeover. But all of those kind of things are, it's not necessarily something that's wrong. You could see in David Lange's life he was looking the most healthy at that time when he was in office.
But at a time when people text me and email RNZ saying we want policy, we want issues, we want issues that matter. It's an election year next year, and we've got this stuff about Prince Harry and Meghan Markle and Jacinda Ardern and Clark Gayford getting married.
Yeah, but there are some...
That's the disconnect. That's why people are losing interest in democracy.
I understand that. There are some places that dominates for far too long, and the editorial choices are out of kilter with what the public interest elements should suggest. But I think that people do have a choice. And if you look at... I'm not employed by Radio New Zealand, but you look at the robust debate that goes on at different timescales through the day of any elected politician or person who's in government office. It's pretty robust. You just got to find it and find your areas where you want to.
And you say, Nikki, that at the end of the day, people are human and humans like things that humans do.
You'd have to have a heart of stone not to be moved by Prince Harry this morning talking about his new baby. I mean, that's just human nature.
Very good thoughts. And that ring too, Jacinda's ring was quite nice too, wasn't it?
Actually, I haven't seen
it. It was quite nice. Very good. Selwyn Manning and Nikki Bazan, thank you very much for a great panel. Have a great Tuesday.
Thank you, Wallace.
See you tomorrow.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's programme, details of the government referendum are revealed. A yes or no question on whether to legalise cannabis for those 20 years and up. We talk to an illegal dope grower about what's a workable, legit business model. And is cannabis high on voters' agenda? Checkpoint polls 2 different West Auckland electorates. The Waikato DHB board officially gets the Don't Come Tomorrow notice, and a plan for distributing funds donated for the Mosque shooting victims should be unveiled later this week. Victims say the money is needed right now. About 250 babies are born every minute around the world. We bring you the story of just one.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata DNA. The New Zealand First Leader says democracy is his party's priority, not whether people can smoke pot. The National Party says the referendum to be held at the 2020 election won't be binding because legislation won't have gone through Parliament before the vote. But Winston Peters says as far as he's concerned, it will be. He says the government's chosen to do it this way because it has a lot of work to do over the next 18 months, and trying to get legislation through would have been a distraction.
We'd have been sitting here having raging arguments, probably all the way to the next election. Then they'd be able to say, oh, we're frustrated and we're not to blame, even though we stood here wasting Parliament's time. And so we decided, let's get some fundamental principles out in front of New Zealand people and let them decide.
The government says the draft legislation will set a minimum age of 20 for buying and using cannabis, regulations for commercial supply, and limited options for people to grow cannabis at home. The government is helping victim support to work out how best to allocate money donated to the Mosque shooting victims. It raised $10.5 million and is also in control of almost $3 million raised by other mostly Muslim groups. But so far, only $3 million has been distributed, which has upset many donors. Today, the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, confirmed a plan for how the funds will be handed out and will be revealed sometime this week.
This is a big ask. The scale is significant. They have distributed funds already to those who have been affected by March the 15th, but that is why government has offered support. Even though it's not our fund, we did think that there was really a responsibility to offer up that support, and that is being provided.
Jacinda Ardern says she understands not all the money pledged has actually been handed over. More details have been released about the machete injuries suffered by a woman and her daughter in a pirate attack off Panama in which Alan Culverwell was killed. Darren Culverwell and her two 11-year-old children managed to lock themselves in a cabin and call for help and are now out of hospital and recovering in Panama City. Mr. Culverwell's sister, Darren Hughes, believes her sister-in-law saved the children's lives.
Darren received a machete injury to the upper arm and shoulder area, and she has had 36 stitches internally and externally, very deep wound. Her daughter did receive a blow to the head and the hand. She was struck with, my understanding is, the handle of the machete. Everything is okay, apart from the fact that it's very sore.
Darren Hughes, whose brother Alan Culverwell was killed in a remote part of Panama last week. A sacked member of the Waikato District Health Board is warning services will need to be cut if the board's growing deficit is to be reduced. The Minister of Health is replacing the board with a commissioner and has appointed a former Director General of Health, Dr. Karen Potasi, to take over from tomorrow. The Waikato DHB has faced growing problems, including a forecast deficit of just over $56 million. One of the outgoing board members, Dave McPherson, believes cuts in health services are inevitable.
All the cuts in investment in community mental health services, for instance, or support for Māori health initiatives that he's asked us to do. Now, he's going to have to cut some of them, or he's going to have to cut hospital services.
Dave McPherson believes the board wasn't as dysfunctional as claimed. However, the Senior Doctors Union believes medical staff will be pleased by the decision to replace the board. Ian Powell from the Association of Salaried Medical Specialists says it wasn't functioning well, which was feeding through to management and making the life of health professionals more difficult. Two Reuters journalists jailed in Myanmar after they were convicted of breaking the Official Secrets Act have walked free from prison after spending more than 500 days behind bars. The two reporters were sentenced to 7 years in jail in a case that sparked an outcry from diplomats and human rights advocates around the world. The BBC's Nick Beake is in Yangon.
This has been something which people have been hoping for, but they were by no means expecting. It's come finally as part of a pardon here from the government, Aung San Suu Kyi's government, who for the past 18 months have absolutely refused to do anything to either support these journalists or free them in any way. But that changed this morning. They're now free. They're being reunited with their families behind closed doors.
Nick Beake reporting from Myanmar. Interim name suppression has been granted to 4 people charged over the abduction of a woman in Wellington in March. 2 men, aged 27 and 30, appeared in the Wellington District Court this afternoon, charged with wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm and abduction. 2 women, aged 26 and 35, have also been charged with abduction. The men have been remanded in custody and the women are on bail to reappear at later dates. It's coming up to 5 past 5. All Black Ben Smith may have played his last match for the Highlanders. Smith is likely to miss the rest of the regular Super Rugby season with a hamstring injury, ruling him out for 6 to 8 weeks. With the Highlanders 6th on a congested table, they may struggle to make the playoffs. And this is Ben Smith's final season with the side, as he'll join French club Pau after the World Cup. The Highlanders assistant coach Glenn Delaney says they're used to getting by without key players.
We lost Aaron Smith for a bit, and we've had Liam out for a bit, and Waisaki's been out for a bit. So, we can't do anything about it. What we do is we'll support Ben and make sure the rehab's right and that he's back and firing on all cylinders as soon as he can. But look, we'll miss him for sure. He's great to have around, great leader on the field, and we're very lucky that him and Luke have been co-captaining, so we don't lose all our leadership at all. We've got Luke out there and plenty of other guys to support him.
On a brighter note for the Highlanders, All Blacks Liam Squire and Waisaki Naholo are back from injury and available for this weekend's match against the Argentinian side, the Jaguars. Manchester City can win the English Premier League football title with a victory at Brighton on the final weekend. In their penultimate game, City beat Leicester City 1-0 at home, a result which put them back at the top of the table with a 1-point advantage over Liverpool. If Manchester City beats Brighton, they will secure the title, but any other result will leave the door ajar for Liverpool, who play Wolves. That's the news.
A stark warning on species.
Well, the report aims to be scary. It's trying to wake up governments to take action to try and stem the loss of species.
Elderly Aucklanders protest.
You're young, Ruth. Well, I do my best. I'm not planning on killing over any time soon.
And it's a boy.
We've got champagne. We've had one bottle already.
The big moments. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 with Susie Ferguson and Corin Dan.
Then on 9 to noon, what made a big Australian law firm agree to underwrite a class action against Southern Response? And after 10, author Paul Mason on why human beings need to defend themselves from machine control. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Western Bay of Plenty. Mainly fine apart from areas of cloud and isolated light showers in the east. Waikato to Wellington, including Eastern Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Mainly fine, some morning low cloud or fog tomorrow. For Gisborne to Wairarapa, cloudy periods with isolated light showers in the north. Becoming fine in Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa tomorrow, apart from morning fog. For Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow with a few showers developing in the west. Westland and Fiordland, fine with increasing high cloud today. Rain developing tomorrow, possibly heavy. Canterbury and Otago, cloudy areas and patchy drizzle clearing tomorrow. Scattered light rain developing inland later tomorrow. Southland, fine weather today apart from areas of low cloud or fog. Scattered light rain developing tomorrow. Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy. It's 5:08. You're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. As the government announces its plan to hold a yes-no vote on cannabis legalisation, the New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says whether New Zealanders can smoke pot or not isn't his party's priority. The referendum is the result of a supply and confidence deal between Labour and the Green Party. If the nation votes to legalise cannabis in next year's referendum, anyone wishing to buy or use the drug will have to be at least 20, and cannabis will only be able to be consumed in people's homes or licensed premises. Here's our political reporter Joe Moyer.
The Justice Minister Andrew Little says the draft legislation to help inform those voting in the referendum will be available as early as the end of this year.
It will be well in advance of the next election. It has to be. We want people to be well informed. We want a good choice to be made. But actually, we want a good debate. And we want the experts from all quarters to be coming out and informing the electorate throughout the course of the election.
The legislation will include a minimum age of 20, which Mr Little says is to avoid encouraging a black market. The Green Party's Chloe Swarbrick, who has worked on the Cabinet paper with Mr Little, says there's no way people will be able to light up in the street or outside schools.
What we have done is decided that there will be limited spaces where people can consume. Those are private premises and licensed premises.
New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters isn't busting to pass cannabis laws, but he is a big fan of referendums.
Look, we've got some serious fundamentals we're facing over the next 18 months, and seeing whether people are going to be smoking pot or not is not our priority. However, democracy is, and that's why we'll ask New Zealand people.
Whether the draft legislation will actually come into force if the government was to change after the next election relies on the National Party committing to fulfilling the will of the people. At this stage, Nationals leader Simon Bridges won't give that commitment.
I can't say because I haven't even seen the draft law. I got basic questions like, what's the tax rate? Will edible gummy bears be legal? Will gangs be able to sell? I mean, I think the government would like to pitch this as some sort of paradise situation where people will be able to grow a couple of plants in their backyard. But actually, will it be a situation where corporates for profit are going to be able to peddle gummy bears and edibles to our children? We have no detail.
Nationals Deputy Leader and Drug Reform spokesperson Paula Bennett was asked whether she thought Nationals should sign up to a cross-party group. Up until now, the problem in her mind has been that the group was run by, quote, Chloe Swarbrick and her mates.
I just don't see how, with all respect, a junior member of parliament that is not part of government is the spokesperson on drug reform, which could change the social fabric of this country. So if they're serious about a cross-party, put a cabinet minister in there and I will happily sit with them and any other member of parliament.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and Mr Little are both stressing that the referendum is binding because all three government parties are signing up to it. In order to be truly binding, the legislation would have to be passed by Parliament ahead of the referendum and then automatically enacted if there was a majority yes vote. In this case, the legislation will only be in a draft form. But Ms Ardern has ruled out any substantial changes, such as the age of purchase or where it can be bought.
What, of course, we need to give the assurance to the public is that the core principles, substantive policy decisions, will remain the same. And look, that's the same as what any government, when they put a bill before the House and go through a select committee process, there'll often be principal decisions that do not change through a select committee process, but technical amendments do.
Andrew Little is inviting all political parties to take part in a cross-party group designing the draft legislation, which he will chair. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
An illegal cannabis grower says keeping tax on cannabis products to about 20%, along with a minimum purchase age of 20, would help curb a black market if people vote yes to legalising marijuana. He's been growing cannabis for 20 years and says he's sick of feeling like a ninja hiding from the law.
I basically learned to grow cannabis to help fund a family member's operation. So they had a private operation where they needed some money, so that was my introduction into it. I then continued to grow cannabis to basically feed and provide for my family as I was on a benefit. That's putting clothes on the kids' back, shoes on their feet, all the things they need for school and all the extracurricular things they need. So it was great in the sense that I had that particular money to be able to provide for the needs of my kids, because a lot of the people that don't have money, that live in poverty, their kids miss out on a lot of stuff, and later on down the track, a lot of those kids are the ones that we see in gangs and stuff like that.
Because you know a few people listening to this are going to say, isn't there another job that you could have got?
I actually did end up getting a full-time job. But because of the type of cannabis that I grow, which is a connoisseur, it's very high quality, not necessarily high strength, but of high quality, the market was always there. My partner and I both worked, but the needs and, the price of living is so high, but wages haven't gone up. So everything else has gone up, with power, food, fuel, cigarettes, whatnot. But our wages have never gone up. So we had to still keep hustling, what I call hustling, just to make those ends meet, just to be able to live a bit more better than struggling and having $30 at the end of the week to try and juggle on food. So
you're basically subsidising your income with a sideline business?
Yes. And providing, the thing is, I'm not involved in gangs and stuff like that, so a lot of my customers are just people like yourself. They're the general public who don't want to associate with gangs and stuff like that with buying cannabis. So I carried on as a business just to be able to give to people that needed it, and to provide for other like-minded people who didn't want to be going to gang-related tinny shops or going to dark side of town to score rubbish as well, rubbish type of cannabis. So I grew for selected lot of people who wanted a high-quality product.
When you say you're providing a service for people who need it, do you mean people who want it, recreational users?
No, it's a bit of both. So there's always the recreational side, but a lot of people self-medicate with cannabis. So a lot of the strains of cannabis that I was dealing in and growing were the medicinal type of strains that had a good ratio of the CBD and THC. So I had people, with anxiety to help with that, so you give them certain strains.
But cannabis for some people contributes to poor mental health.
With that side, what we need to do to help those people is have the right strains of cannabis available to us. So, when people think cannabis in New Zealand, the past thing on cannabis is that it's been very high potency. That high potency cannabis is no good for those type of people. They need a good balance of CBD plus a minimum amount of THC. So nothing to get them stoned and out of control, but just enough to keep them in track. People like that with the mental health system, they're getting loaded up on heavy pharmaceutical pills to zombie them out, to knock them out so that they don't flare up. If we can provide them the right medicine with the right strains, the right ratios, it'll be beneficial to them.
Obviously that is open to debate, but I'm just wondering, how do you think that, if legalisation happens, how would that affect your business?
If cannabis is legalised and all that, and people are able to grow their own, or if commercial companies are able to provide people with cannabis, I'm all for that.
But would you stay in the business? Would you stay in the business as a legitimate grower?
I would transition myself into the legitimate side of the business because I love growing. I love the whole aspect of growing marijuana, what it really is about and what it can do for people. So I'm passionate about it. So yes, I will transition to the new side and not on the commercial side like what I did before. I'll basically be going in as a worker to help form businesses. So people like me who have got the IP to get them started.
Do you pay tax on your income from cannabis?
No, but I give to charity. I'm always giving to charity. So I support Salvation Army. We go into the old pack and save, fill up trolleys of cans and food in there, and then donate it back to Salvation Army. I help out local sports clubs, donating socks, rugby, shorts, stuff like that for the ones that are struggling.
So you're telling me that's your way of paying tax on this extra income, in essence?
I never looked at it like that. But if you're like me, if you've had a good thing, you want to share it with people. So I've never looked at it as a way of tax, but I'm saying I'm not one of those ones who just grow for the full profit.
How much do you reckon you make a year from selling cannabis, and how much would you sell in a year?
Depends on quality. In my first sort of times I was doing it, I was making about 50 grand a year, extra, and that's just selling it in bulk. That's not trying to sell it commercially in tinnies, and try and...
That is some serious coin, 50 grand.
That's nothing compared to the real growers. There's real growers here where I come from that are cracking 200 grand a year to over $1 million. So you'd be happy
to pay tax on that money then?
Definitely.
To go legal?
Why not? Definitely, yeah.
Just in terms of what might happen, so obviously there's tax on cigarettes, there's tax on alcohol. What do you think would be fair tax to place on marijuana? So it's about 50% on cigarettes. Do you reckon should be in the same ballpark if cannabis is made legal?
Well, it depends. The government would like that. As a cannabis grower and representing other cannabis growers, I would say that's ludicrous, and that'll only drive growers back into the black market, little snippet I caught from the Ministry of Justice earlier this year is, talking about 70% tax. In California, they have 60%. They have to pay 2 sets of licenses and then pay money to different boards.
So what do you think would be fair?
Thriving. I think it'll be fair if all the profit, if a true cannabis business can give profit back to the communities that need it the most, because
everybody pays tax, though. Everybody pays tax. So what tax would be fair on cannabis products? What's your figure?
To be fair, I would still stay around, say, 20%. The stuff that goes involved that you have to do to grow cannabis is a lot more than what people think. I hear things that people say it's easy to grow cannabis. It isn't. So 20% is reality.
The other consideration is what age people should be able to legally smoke cannabis or consume cannabis in some form. What would you be comfortable with? The recommendation is 20 years.
Yeah, I'd say 20, 21.
But you're providing product to people younger than that at the moment.
Yes, but in a legal sense, I'm thinking of a place like a dispensary where people can come and go. But, we've got to go back to around that age group, what are we looking at? Because, like from the age of 12, you pay an adult fee on a bus in the cities of Wellington. From the age of 14, you're legally allowed to leave school. At the age of 16, you're consenting to sex. So with cannabis, I bet you a lot of the people who have smoked cannabis in their day and like me have had it as early as 13, have experienced it at 13. When I experienced it at 13, I didn't become addicted or whatever. It was just a smoke. Then later on, when I was 16 or 17, I was out scoring. So
20 you think is reasonable?
I think, 2021 is definitely reasonable. I'm just trying to, say in the black market side, it's anyone's game, and really when money's coming in your door, it's better to take it than send them away to someone else that'll give them shit or, what I'm talking shit has been crap weed.
So have you considered the fact that if it is legalised, it could actually lower your income because you may have more competition, it would cut out the black market, that would be one of the aims of it. And anyway, people could legally grow a couple of plants in their backyard. So have you thought about the fact it could cut
definitely.
your income?
The thing is, anyone can grow cannabis, but only cannabis growers, masters, can pull off the desired product that people want. So that's why I say there's a lot more into growing cannabis. People, yes, they can grow their own, but who's going to help those people that live in a Housing New Zealand house? Will Housing New Zealand let them grow? Who's going to help people that are going to grow in live in apartments? There still has to be a recreational cannabis company, but I think what the government need to do is just reduce the numbers to maybe less than a handful. And that way there you won't get all this, everything getting out of control like it is in the States. You've got heaps of dispensaries, heaps of cannabis companies, and it's just mind-boggling.
So you're talking about quite tight regulation and supporting quite tight regulation, despite the fact that you're basically out there at the moment open slather and your competition is in the same situation.
Well, we're all open slather because the government have made it like this, and we've had to do this. I mean, we have to do this to survive. We get terrorised by the cops when they come here and blue our plants and stuff like that. A lot of people are only trying to, make ends meet. So we're still carrying on what we need to do to survive. There's other people who are out there slaying it for profit, though.
Do you have any convictions for cultivation or use?
Yes.
So how would you feel if that prevented you from getting a legitimate licence to set up a cannabis business? Because that is a possibility.
I would be disappointed, but the thing is, if New Zealand follows the what everyone else is doing, the other countries, cannabis growers with convictions are the ones that should be given the licences first.
Why do you say that?
You look at Well, you look at this. You look at how it is now. You've got all these corporations who had nothing to do with cannabis before wanting to jump in the cannabis game. People who have got convictions are actually, conviction. That's like a prerequisite, because you've got it on paper that you can actually do it. So
you reckon it's quality control?
It is definitely quality control, because on the black market, if you look at things like prices right now, and at the end of the off-season, it's a lot of inferior quality cannabis is moving through the black market at a high rate. And that's only because you look at the end of the off-season, when there was no cannabis, high demand but low supply, so the prices just shot out of control.
So what is the price at the moment? Give us a.
So we've just, it's just harvest. Harvest time's just happened. So cannabis right now is $250 an ounce. So you can buy any kind of quality cannabis for that. You can be fussy and go for the best quality. Later on, when we get into Christmas and that, the prices can get up to about $450 to $600 an ounce, and that's just in near the cities where we're from.
Okay, so the $250 an ounce, right, about now, is that retail or wholesale?
That's wholesale. So, but see, this is what's happening right now, because you've got a big influx of cannabis. There's only a few, say, tinny shops that are really thriving, because at the moment, all those people who can grow cannabis have grown, enough for their personal stash. But in about 2 months' time, their personal stash is going to dwindle off, so then they start going back to those tinny shops or to people who have wholesale cannabis in ounces or whatever to carry on from there.
Do you feel any moral turmoil or concern about the business you currently run?
Look at what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to grow a good, safe product for people who need it.
How do you know it's safe? How do you know what you're growing is safe? Because I don't imagine you test it, do you?
Because I use safe practices. I've always grown organically. I don't use chemicals. I don't use pesticides. Thoroughly clean. It's a practice. When you're a true cannabis grower, you pick up all the good growing practices, and if I was to go and get a ticket at the local polytechnic or what, I'll be at like level 4+ because of the good growing practices. So that's what I'm growing a product that I would have myself. If it wasn't what I would have, I wouldn't grow it or even sell it.
So, I probably don't need to ask you this, but just for the record, in the referendum, which way are you going to vote?
Yes, I'll be voting yes.
And that, of course, was an illegal cannabis grower speaking on his views about the referendum, which way he'll vote, and, well, how he thinks the business model should look. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, what now for the Waikato DHB after its board is sacked? Are trackless trams the solution to congestion in the capital? And how community groups are banding together to make homes healthier for kids? We'd love your feedback as always. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We've just got a little bit of time now where I can quickly get to some of the feedback on the cannabis issue. Don has got in touch via email saying, what's the point of interviewing an illegal grower who doesn't pay tax? Why ask a person who intends to grow dope commercially what rate of tax they will pay? That's up to the government. It's a waste of time. But Tommy from Te Puna says, finally a man of mana and honesty who grows marijuana and gives back to those in need. Put him on the referendum select committee, I say. And he says, I find myself really liking this guy. Look, he's got some good points. And Scott from Whangarei says, "Hi Lisa, the transition from illegal to legal growers of cannabis needs to be well set up if we are to learn from California's mistakes. The small, medium growers who wanted to go legit there were heavily regulated against in favour of huge pharma. Making the situation for them worse before legislation. Tax is one thing, but licences and regulations are the other major thing to look at." Keep your feedback coming. I'm sure you've got strong opinions on this one. And after 6, we talk to the Minister, Andrew Little. We also go out onto the streets of West Auckland to see what people in 2 different electorates think about the issue. Do get in touch. But first, it is time for the headlines.
The Prime Minister says the substantive principles of the draft cannabis legislation are very unlikely to change after experts have had their say. The government says the draft legislation will be ready to go before the referendum at the 2020 election on whether to legalise cannabis. Jacinda Ardern says the referendum will be binding insofar as the 3 governing parties have committed to honouring it. The government is helping victim support to work out how best to allocate money donated to the mosque shooting victims. It raised $10.5 million and is also in control of almost $3 million raised by other mostly Muslim groups. But so far, only $3 million has been distributed, which has upset many donors. The government now says a plan for how the funds will be handed out will be revealed sometime this week. A sacked member of the Waikato District Health Board says services will need to be cut if the board's growing deficit is to be reduced. The Minister of Health is replacing the board with a commissioner and has appointed a former Director General of Health, Dr Karen Potasi, to take over from tomorrow. The Waikato District Health Board has faced growing problems, including a forecast deficit of just over $56 million. A solo dad with lung cancer says he only has enough money to fund another 3 months of an unfunded cancer treatment. Carl Taylor was part of a march through Wellington to call on the government to increase pharmac spending. Mr Taylor was told he had no hope when diagnosed with lung cancer, but the unfunded drug alectinib has been able to extend his life. He hopes the petition, signed by more than 7,000 people, will convince Pharmac to fund the drug. The Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, was egged by a protester while electioneering in a rural town on the New South Wales-Victoria border. However, the egg bounced off Mr Morrison's head and didn't smash. The woman who threw it was tackled by security guards. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Ouch, that must have hurt. Thanks, Susanna. Time for business now with Nona Peltier. Nona, petroleum exploration industry. Now, they've got an upcoming conference, but they're kind of keeping it under wraps. What's all the secrecy about?
It's interesting. So we've covered these conferences before, and they're always very lively with protests and so forth. But this year, the not just the date, but the location as well are being kept a secret. If you want to know where and when the conference is going to be held, you have to fill in an expression of interest and file it to the organisers, and then they'll let you know, I guess, if you meet the criteria for, a person who would be attending and not necessarily protesting. So they're really concerned about the security of the delegates. And I guess this is the backdrop again, we've seen recently, of course, with the removal of offshore exploration and new permits for that. There's a lot of things happening in the industry, and with the climate change action and so on, I guess they got reason to be concerned.
Have they given any indication of, as you say, you fill out a form expressing of interest, where the bar is set?
No, I don't know. I didn't fill one in.
So maybe that is a test.
It could be.
All right, let's move on to the Reserve Bank of Australia. It's held interest rates steady despite lower than expected inflation. So, how has the market reacted to that?
Interesting. It was, I guess some people were thinking that after this long, I think it's been, 33 months since the Reserve Bank of Australia has moved on interest rates. They're a little bit lower than our official cash rate. We're at 1.75%. They're at 1.5%. So for them to have moved, it would have been interesting to see how the dynamic would have worked in the market, but they didn't move, even though their economy isn't as strong as ours, and even though their housing market is softer as well. Inflation there is also lagging, so the fact that they haven't moved was kind of interesting for the market, and what that did was it saw the Australian dollar rise almost 0.5 cent against the US, and saw the Kiwi drop almost 0.5 cent against the Australian, which is interesting. Now, tomorrow, our Reserve Bank is going to be reviewing its monetary policy statement and releasing that. And the market is expecting that the Reserve Bank may move, but then with this happening, maybe not. So we'll see what happens. So yeah, it's been an interesting day on the market. And of course, yesterday we had the talk out of the United States. That was on Sunday when the president tweeted that he was going to raise tariffs by the end of the week against the Chinese. The Chinese, that's right. I think the Japanese are in the line, but not up front, no. So yeah, on $200 billion worth of goods. So this was not what the market was hoping for after this long of talks. There was kind of hoping that there'd be a bit of a truce, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. The market did recover a little bit today. So we rose 67 points. That's about 2/3% to 10,027. And our dollar is trading at 66.1 US cents, 94 Australian, and 50.4 pence.
Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Peltier with Business News. A plan for how to distribute the remainder of the money to mosque shooting victims will be announced this week. Pressure is mounting on victim support to hand out more of the millions of dollars it has collected for those affected by the attacks. And as Logan Church reports, that money is desperately needed.
Tamel Atatuju was shot 9 times at Al Noor Mosque on March 15 when a gunman opened fire. Almost 2 months on, he is slowly recovering.
Some little sharpness is coming out. It was last couple of weeks I was tried dealing with that. It's quite hurtful. So I asked the doctors yesterday, they pull out kindly. So finally, because it's maybe 3 weeks actually, I have to deal with that pain.
Today is also the start of the Islamic tradition Ramadan, which for most involves fasting during the day. But that's not possible for Tamel, who has to take regular medication.
Previous years I do Ramadan and I'm fasting because I'm healthy and strong. But this year is so different. And I'm not doing fasting this year because of my condition. I'm not healthy as before and I'm not fit as same as before too. And then I use lots of medication.
I've met Tamel several times now since the shooting, and I'm always amazed at his good humour. His spirits are always high. But underneath, things are hard, and that's not just from the pain.
At the moment also I get the money from the ACC, just. But if it's to be not donated, added on, it's going to be finished and then I can't survive without the donation.
And how much money have you received from victim support?
They paid me first, second day, I think, third day, $5,000 and then $8,000, so which is $13,000 from the victim support.
So far, victim support has handed out 2 lots of emergency funding, totalling $3 million. Those injured received 2 payments, one of $5,000, the other of $8,000. Families who lost a loved one were paid 2 payments of $15,000. Tamel has received some money from victim support, which he deeply appreciates. But he says all of the $10.5 million victim support has needs to be paid out as soon as possible, especially with bills piling up as winter begins.
Because lots of Middle Eastern countries is one man's working, and then, and if died, how these people will survive. So as soon as possible.
So do you think victim support needs to get this money out as fast as possible?
Yeah, as soon as possible.
Victim support has maintained a stony silence on its plan to distribute the remaining money, instead responding to media requests by sending a lengthy written question and answers document. The Wellington-based organisation says they are too busy dealing with victims to be interviewed about concerns about where the money is going. Today, the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, told media in Wellington a plan for how the funds would be handed out would be revealed sometime this week.
This is a big ask. The scale is significant. They have distributed funds already to those who have been affected by March the 15th, but that is why government has offered support. Even though it's not our fund, we did think that there was really a responsibility to offer up that support, and that is being provided.
Jacinda Ardern says she understands not all of the money that has been pledged has actually been handed over to fundraisers. But until that happens, it's a case of waiting, until victim support finally reveals how the money raised will be distributed. And for some, that can't come fast enough. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
He's heir. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are celebrating after the much-anticipated birth of their first child. The baby boy, 7th in line to the throne, was born early this morning and weighed 3.2 kilos. Speaking at Windsor Castle this morning, Prince Harry described his son as a bit overdue, but absolutely to die for. Josh Heslop reports.
Oh yay! Oh yay! Oh yay! Buckingham Palace proudly announces the birth of a newly born royal baby boy to the Duke and the Duchess of Sussex. God bless America and God save the Queen.
A royal town crier announcing the news the world had waited weeks for. The baby boy, 7th in line to the throne, was born at 5:26 a.m. London time and weighed 3.2 kilos. Just hours after announcing the Duchess of Sussex was in labour, a beaming Duke of Sussex spoke of his delight in welcoming his first child.
Yes, I'm very excited to announce that Meghan and myself had a baby boy early this morning, a very healthy boy. Mother and baby are doing incredibly well. It's been the most amazing experience I could ever possibly imagine. How any woman does what they do is beyond comprehension, but we're both absolutely thrilled and so grateful to all the love and support for everybody out there, from everybody out there. It's been amazing, so we just wanted to share this with everybody.
Speaking outside the stables on the Windsor estate, Prince Harry said the couple was yet to decide on a name.
It's the baby's a little bit overdue, so we've had a little bit of time to think about it, but we're still. That's the next bit. But for us, I think we'll be seeing you guys in probably 2 days' time as planned, as a family, to be able to share it with you guys and so everyone can see the baby.
Speculation had been rife the baby might have been born much earlier following the arrival of the Duchess's mother, Doria Ragland, over Easter and a visit by the Queen to Frogmore Cottage last week. Meghan has not been seen publicly since the couple's official state visit to Morocco in February.
I haven't been at many births. This is definitely my first birth. But it was amazing, absolutely incredible. And as I said, I'm so incredibly proud of my wife. And as every father and parent would ever say, you know, your baby is absolutely amazing, but this little thing is absolutely to die for. So I'm just over the moon.
On the streets of Windsor and around Buckingham Palace, tourists were thrilled at the timing of the new arrival.
It's always nice to have babies, so it's fun, and I think that it ties the two countries together a little bit.
I'm not so interested in the royal family, but I'm happy for the couple, for the family. It's a beautiful news.
That makes me happy. They look like a very good couple, especially Meghan's a really beautiful lady, so good for them and good for England.
I'm really pleased for them. It's very exciting news, and it's another great grandchild for the Queen, and it's just all good news.
The baby is the 8th great-grandchild of the 93-year-old Queen and could be entitled to joint British and American citizenship. Across the Atlantic, the British owners of the Tea and Sympathy Cafe in New York hosted a champagne breakfast to celebrate.
Well, I think one really important thing is that it's a little bit of good news in this day and age when we find ourselves dealing with so much misery and so much woe and so much sadness and so much intrigue and political maelstroms and all that stuff. I'm hoping that it's just nice to have a little bit of good news, something we can celebrate over there in England, but also celebrate over here, because of course America has a dog in the hunt, as the phrase would have it. You know, we have this wonderful American princess.
Royal experts say the baby is the first mixed-race baby to be born into a senior position in British royalty, but just whether he will be bestowed the title of prince is likely to be decided by the Queen in the next few days.
I think it's fantastic we're going to have a brown little royal baby. I think that's such amazing news. In this world in which it's sort of much more of a melting pot now, I think it's great that we're able to embrace that and have it as such a fantastic piece of news, something we can all celebrate.
Prince Harry is still scheduled to travel to The Hague in the Netherlands on Thursday to promote the Invictus Games, but well-wishers will be hoping for a glimpse of the new family before then. For Checkpoint, Josh Heslop.
United Nations scientists have published the most comprehensive and damning research ever about the deadly harm humanity is doing to nature. The Global Assessment of Diversity, unveiled in Paris earlier today, warns that up to 1 million species of plants and animals face extinction. It directly blames the demands of an expanding human population and calls for an end to what it describes as harmful subsidies for farming and fossil fuels. The BBC's Matt McGrath was in Paris for the report's release.
There was strong applause from scientists here in Paris as this key report on the state of nature was presented. But after 3 years of work, the reception was more about relief than joy, because the contents of this stark global assessment were nothing to celebrate. 3/4 of the land on our planet now bears the deep physical scars from decades of intense human activity. Vast tracts of forest have been cleared for farming as demand for meat from a growing and wealthier population has soared. On the seas, it's a similar story, with industrial fleets trawling huge quantities of fish. Across Africa and Asia, wildlife is hunted for food and fortune as never before. Professor Sandra Diaz from Argentina is a co-chair of the report. She says these threats are a recipe for the destruction of the world as we know it.
We have this deep interweaving with the fabric of life. So if life on Earth is in trouble, we are on trouble. Our future is at stake. There's really no human future without a future for the fabric of life that sustains us.
As with climate change, those in the richer parts of the world are the ones who have done most to drive this ecological crisis. But, according to the report's lead author, Professor Unai Pascual, just as with rising temperatures, it will be people in the poorer parts who will most keenly feel the loss of species.
The human species possibly will continue to exist, but the conflicts among ourselves, among humans, is possibly going to increase over the control of even more scarce resources.
But the report is not without hope. It says that we can turn the tide on this potential disaster by deep and unprecedented change. That will require an end to subsidies for farming and fossil fuels, and it will need a rapid expansion of protected areas. Beyond that, though, it will require changes in outlook by each and every one of us. We will have to redefine what a successful life looks like. The era of consumption without consequence is ending rapidly.
Matt McGrath reporting there. A member of the beleaguered Waikato District Health Board, which has today been replaced with a commissioner, is worried health services will have to be cut if a ballooning deficit is to be reduced. The Health Minister David Clark appointed former Director General of Health, Dr Karen Potasi, as commissioner starting tomorrow. Here's our Waikato reporter, Andrew McRae.
The Waikato DHB has faced mounting issues, including a forecast deficit of $56 million, misspending by a former CEO, Nigel Murray, a failed multi-million-dollar smart health app, and a recent decision to put on hold a search for a permanent chief executive. The move hasn't come as a surprise, as Dr Clark announced last month he was considering sacking the entire board over its poor finances and governance. 9 of the 11 board members then offered to resign. Dr Clark's expecting the Commissioner to deliver a plan to turn the deficit around.
I'm not going to pretend that that will happen overnight. They've had a history of difficult issues at that DHB, but what I need to see is a plan that gives me confidence that the DHB is on the right track.
One of the board members who didn't offer to resign, Dave McPherson, says cuts in health services are inevitable if the Minister's expecting the Commissioner to turn things around.
Cuts in investment in community mental health services, for instance, or support for Māori health initiatives that he's asked us to do. Now, he's going to have to cut some of them, or he's going to have to cut hospital services. There is no other way to reduce the budget other than to cut some of those services. So that's the sort of question she's now going to be faced with.
Dave McPherson believes that the board wasn't dysfunctional, regardless of what the Minister says.
Our board could work together on 95% of the issues we were in agreement on.
The other board member who didn't offer to resign is Marianne Gill, a member since 2016. She says it's a real shame the Minister didn't talk to the elected members before making his decision.
at some point, if I meet him privately, I'd like to sort of take him through some of the really good work that's gone on in the last 2.5 years while I've been on the board.
Marianne Gill acknowledges that the board's financial performance is not something she's particularly proud of.
But you could look at any other DHB across the country. There is actually a system-wide problem that the Minister and this government needs to look at in so much as funding of health is concerned. And one of the things that disappoints me about his release today is that he hasn't mentioned the system, and the system is what's delivering these poor results.
The head of the Association of Salaried Medical Specialists, Ian Powell, says there'll be a sense of relief now the board's gone. He says doctors working at hospitals run by the Waikato DHB were noticing problems and felt the board was clearly dysfunctional.
And it was feeding through, that dysfunction was feeding through to the management decision-making below the board, and that was making the life of senior doctors and other health professionals more difficult in terms of decision-making, having a sense of direction.
Ian Powell says while they don't advocate appointing commissioners to run DHBs willy-nilly, it's a last resort for a board in trouble. With the commissioner in place for 3 years, voters won't now have a chance to elect members until October 2022. In Hamilton, the Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
It's about 10 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let us know what's on your mind and about anything you may have heard on the program today. Are trackless trams the solution to the capital's congestion? Efforts to reduce the city's traffic problems are supposed to be sorted with a project called Let's Get Welly Moving. Problem is, it's stuck in gridlock. Michael Kropp reports on a possible solution that's much cheaper than the option of light rail.
The commuting rush in the central city, bus after bus after bus, they're nose to tail and full of people. The city's looking for a mass transit upgrade to move more people in fewer vehicles. Light rail and bus rapid transit are among the considerations. But visiting Australian transport consultant Marie Verscha thinks trackless trams would be perfect for Wellington. At up to 3 carriages long, they can carry 300 people and look a lot like a sleekish tram or a really long bendy bus. But unlike a tram, these are fitted with tyres and can run on existing roads.
The advantage of this vehicle is that it can actually deviate from the track if there was a need to do so. So if there was an accident ahead, it could actually be rerouted.
The trackless trams, which are electric and have a top speed of 70 kilometres an hour, can be configured to run without a driver and are fitted with radars and cameras to prevent collisions. But Mrs. Verscha says they'll only be useful and therefore used if they're given dedicated space and priority at the lights, so they're not held up by cars.
It can be implemented easily without the disruption to your businesses while you're doing it.
So you don't have to dig up an entire road?
No, you just paint the lines on the road, and in fact you don't even really need. That's one of 4 safety systems that aren't necessarily needed when you've got a driver.
Hills are less of a problem too, a bonus in Wellington. These tired contraptions can go up much steeper hills than a tram, so no runga gorges in, whereas light rail would need tunnels to ease the climb. Talk Wellington co-convener Isabella Cawthorne says while there are some clear benefits to trackless trams, they are a new technology, and she's urging a cautious approach.
The game changer that Wellington needs is a service that you can rely on to jump on, jump off, right throughout the day and also into the night, that connects you well.
The city's Mayor Justin Lester says detailed analysis is required to compare the options.
But the proof is in the pudding. You'd want to get some good analysis of the technology. You'd probably want to go over and have a look at it in operation.
Since the Basin Reserve flyover got knocked down in 2014, local and central government have been working together on a solution to ease congestion around the city. But the release of Let's Get Welly Moving has been continually delayed due to a protracted battle over who is going to pay for it. Minutes from a transport agency board meeting in October show it's estimated to cost up to $4 billion, almost as much as Auckland City Rail Link, and the agency doesn't have the money. The Transport Minister, Phil Twyford, says he hopes to announce the Let's Get Welly Moving package in the coming weeks, but trackless trams are one of the options he's received advice on. RNZ asked Mr Lester to explain what's in the announcement.
The announcement will be the announcement.
So, until Let's Get Wally Moving is unveiled, the capital remains in a state of limbo. For Checkpoint, Carmichael Crop there, nay.
People desperately seeking cancer treatment, which could extend their lives by years, took their battle to increase Pharmac spending to Parliament today. About 100 cancer sufferers, their families and supporters marched down Lambton Quay to deliver 8 different petitions. For many, including one solo dad with lung cancer, they're running out of money and time. Mediana Johnson reports.
It was a day to remember those who had passed and those who are continuing to fight for more time. Tears fell as the marchers stopped at Pharmac for 3 minutes of silence, where its chief executive and chairman came outside to acknowledge them. Among the crowd was Carl Taylor, marching with his 2 sons. He was told there was no hope for his lung cancer until he learned the drug alectinib could extend his life by 3 years. However, the drug comes at a hefty price tag, around $6,000 a month, and he only has $23,000 on his Give a Little page.
So that's only about 3.5 months worth, and if I don't get any more donations from that, because I'm out of money. I mean, I sold my car, I cashed in my KiwiSaver, I sold my welder and the Xbox, and all sorts of bits and pieces on trade me in private sales. So, and that raised a couple of months worth of it. So I don't know what's going to happen after I run out of money.
Carl Taylor says he's hopeful that Pharmac and the government will fund the drugs he and others so desperately need. Ben Schrader has chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which almost killed him in 2016. But he was handed a lifeline when a drug company offered a window for sufferers to access their $100,000 a year treatment at a reduced price.
I'm actually really, really lucky in that I was able to gain access to that compassionate program, and it's really unfair, desperately unfair, in fact, that others that followed after me don't have that.
The marchers are petitioning the government to fund better treatments for lung, breast, ovarian, leukemia and myeloma, a type of blood cancer. Myeloma New Zealand Chief Executive Ken Romeril says there has been no new funding for this type of cancer for 5 years.
The gap between Australia and New Zealand and certainly the rest of the world, we number now down at 19 or 20 in the OECD countries for drug spend, and that's not right.
MPs from across the political spectrum stood at the front of Parliament to accept the petitions. Rachel Chuka sat on the steps of Parliament shaking her head as MP Ian Lees-Galloway told the crowd that there were a lot of things Pharmac did well, but the government was looking into improving the system.
Like, I'm shaking my head because for these people it's all about time. Having the time is of the essence, because when you've got a terminal illness that every day counts. So to hear excuses is really, really difficult.
She has been fighting for her sister Wiki alongside the rest of her whānau for the treatment she needs to extend her life as she battles advanced breast cancer. And she's sick of waiting for politicians to act.
We've seen medicines being left on the waiting list for 10 years. Well, that's ridiculous. If it's not going to be funded, just say it, take it off, it's not an option. But I think it's pretty sad when we don't have a consistent approach to care.
Pharmac Chief Executive Sarah Fitt wouldn't comment on funding, saying that the day was about the marchers and what they've been through. The petitions will be tabled by the various MPs. The pressure is now on to see whether the government will act to give the likes of Carl, Wiki and their families the extra years they so desperately need. For Checkpoint, Mediana Johnson Tēnei.
Tiger Woods, who stunned the sports world when he won his 5th Masters title last month, has received his country's highest civilian honour, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Chris Dignam has more.
Tiger Woods is a global symbol of American excellence, devotion and drive.
President Donald Trump presented Tiger Woods with the Medal of Freedom on Monday, awarding the nation's highest civilian honor to the world's most famous golfer, who overcame an 11-year major championship drought to win the Masters in April.
I just want to say this has been an unbelievable experience, and to have the support that I've had for all these years, and everyone here has seen and been with me for, some of you for my entire life, and some of you for more than half my life. You've seen the good and the bad, the highs and the lows, and I would not be in this position without all of your help.
In a tweet posted a day after Woods won the Masters, Trump said he would give him the award, quote, because of his incredible success and comeback in sports, and more importantly, life. That undoubtedly refers to the personal crises Woods faced, including the loss of most of his major sponsors after admitting to extramarital affairs.
I was unfaithful.
The ceremony in the White House Rose Garden was not without controversy. The New York Times, citing a watchdog group, said the honor leaves the appearance of using his office to reward a business partner. The report said Trump announced in 2014 that Woods would design a golf course in Dubai as part of a project that would be managed by the Trump Organization.
I love you, Mom. Thank you.
The 43-year-old golfer's age has also raised eyebrows. Most other recipients have been awarded the medal much later in their careers. The early betting odds favor the currently injury-free Woods to win the U.S. Open, which is scheduled to begin next month.
And that was Chris Dignam reporting there. After 6, we will talk to the Justice Minister about the cannabis reform.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Lei a tawa tēnei. The Prime Minister says the substantive principles of the draft cannabis legislation are very unlikely to change after experts have had their say. Voters will have the chance to say yes or no to legalising cannabis at the 2020 election based on that draft legislation. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The legislation will set a minimum age of 20 for buying and using cannabis, regulations for commercial supply, limited options for people to grow cannabis at home and a public education program. A cross-party reference group will consult with experts before the legislation is drawn up. Jacinda Ardern says key provisions are unlikely to change to give voters certainty. She says the referendum will be binding insofar as the 3 governing parties have committed to honouring it. However, the National Party maintains the referendum would only be truly binding if legislation was passed and ready to be enacted if there is a majority yes vote. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
The union representing senior doctors at the Waikato DHB says the dismissal of the board is just what's needed. The Minister of Health has appointed Dr Karen Potasi to take over as Commissioner from tomorrow. David Clark says the board's deteriorating financial position, lack of strong governance and ongoing problems with clinical services left him no option. Ian Powell from the Association of Salaried Medical Specialists says it was obvious to staff that the Waikato DHB wasn't functioning well.
I think generally speaking they'll be relieved and pleased and hoping that this will be a circuit breaker looking ahead to turn Waikato DHB around.
Ian Powell says the dysfunction was feeding through to management and making the life of health professionals more difficult. More details have been released about the injuries suffered by a woman and her daughter in a pirate attack off Panama in which Alan Culverwell was killed. His wife Darren Culverwell and their 2 young children managed to lock themselves in a cabin of their yacht and call for help. Matthew Tunison reports.
Alan Culverwell's sister, Darren Hughes, believes her sister-in-law's actions saved the children's lives. Miss Culverwell suffered a large machete wound to her upper arm and shoulder, which required 36 stitches. Her 11-year-old daughter is thought to have been hit in the head with a machete handle. Both are now out of hospital and being supported by relatives, friends and consular staff. This is Matthew Tunison.
2 Reuters journalists jailed in Myanmar after they were convicted of breaking the Official Secrets Act have been freed from prison after spending more than 500 days behind bars. The 2 reporters were convicted in September and sentenced to 7 years in jail. The case raised questions about Myanmar's progress towards democracy and sparked an outcry from diplomats and human rights advocates. It is customary in Myanmar for authorities to free prisoners around the time of the traditional New Year, which began last month. A Wellington transport blog is urging caution over trackless trams because they're such a new technology. An international consultant says the capital would be perfect for trackless trams, which offer many of the same benefits as light rail, but can run on existing roads and cost as little as 1/10 of the price. But Talk Wellington co-convener Isabella Cawthorne says while there are some clear benefits to trackless trams, it should be remembered they are new technology.
We just really want to see the Treasury and the councils making a really sound decision about this one. Don't just be wowed by tech promotion and the spectre of lower costs.
Isabella Cawthorne says the game changer Wellington needs is a reliable, connected service people can jump on and off throughout the day and into the night. The coroner has ruled the death of a man who set himself on fire outside Parliament and died in hospital was suicide. On September the 21st, 2017, Zdenek Haslik was seen around Wellington and in the grounds of Parliament holding placards protesting about what he saw as injustices in the family court system. In findings released today, Coroner Peter Ryan says the 60-year-old referred to having been, quote, murdered by the justice system. He said Mr Haslik's actions were deliberate and there was no opportunity for anyone to intervene. The Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison was hit by an egg thrown by a protester while campaigning in rural New South Wales. It was thrown by a woman in the town of Albury, where an independent candidate is challenging Mr Morrison's Liberal Party in this month's general election. The BBC's Howell Griffith reports.
The Prime Minister was at a Country Women's Association event when the protester tried to break an egg on his head. She failed as it bounced off Scott Morrison and landed in one piece. The 25-year-old woman was tackled to the floor by security staff and taken into custody. Mr Morrison tweeted shortly afterwards that his concern was for a bystander knocked to the ground in the scuffle and that he would stand up to the thuggery of cowardly activists.
Hal Griffith reporting in Sydney. It's 6:05. The Highlanders are getting used to losing key players, with All Black fullback Ben Smith the latest to join the casualty list. Smith may have played his last game for the Highlanders, as a hamstring injury has ruled him out for the next 6 to 8 weeks, so he's likely to miss the rest of the Super Rugby season. The Highlanders co-captain in this final season with the side and will join French club Pau after the World Cup. The Highlanders assistant coach Glenn Delaney says they've been without All Blacks Aaron McKenzie, Liam Squire and Waisake Noholo at various times during the season, and it's simply a case of adapting. But he does say Smith's absence is a big loss. The Chappell-Hadley one-day cricket series between New Zealand and Australia next season has been moved to March. An ongoing dispute between Australia's and India's cricket boards means the 3 games had to be rescheduled from January. Stephen Hewson has the details.
Cricket Australia had hoped to host the Trans-Tasman one-day series in January, but the Australian side will instead travel to the subcontinent during that month, with the Board of Control for Cricket in India refusing to budge on dates for that series. The 3 Chappell-Hadley one-day matches will now be played in Australia on March 13th, 15th and 20th. The Black Caps have a busy summer, with England touring here in October and November for 2020 matches and 2 tests. The New Zealand side then heads to Australia for 3 tests in Perth, Melbourne and Sydney. An India tour here in February for a full series. This is Stephen Hewson.
And the New Zealand golfers Ryan Fox and Danny Lee have both qualified for next week's PGA Championship in New York. It's the second major of the year. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a window on the World Wide Web, data storage and the Arctic. Well, they're all connected, aren't they? Trevor Reekie speaks with Angelique Kidjo, and we have a sofa session with the Arthur Street Loft Orchestra. That's Nights with me, Brian Crump, from After the News at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service till midnight tomorrow for Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Western Bay of Plenty. Mainly fine weather, apart from areas of cloud and isolated light showers in the east. For Waikato to Wellington, including Eastern Bay of Plenty and Central High Country, mainly fine, some morning low cloud or fog tomorrow. Gisborne through to Wairarapa, cloudy periods with isolated light showers in the north, becoming fine in Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa tomorrow, apart from morning fog. For Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow with a few showers developing in the west. Westland, Fiordland, fine with increasing high cloud today, rain developing tomorrow, possibly heavy. Canterbury and Otago, cloudy areas and patchy drizzle clearing tomorrow, scattered light rain developing inland later tomorrow. For Southland, fine today apart from areas of low cloud or fog, scattered light rain developing tomorrow. At the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy weather. It's 6:08. You're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Yes or no? That's the simple choice that voters will be given when it comes to legalising cannabis in the referendum to be held at the general election next year. If the public votes to legalise the drug's recreational use, anyone wishing to buy or use cannabis will have to be at least 20, and it will have to be consumed in people's homes or licensed premises. I asked Justice Minister Andrew Little where Labor sits on the cannabis question.
Right now, our position is to make sure that the referendum runs well, is conducted properly, that people get good information, so that the decision, once it is made by 2.9 million voters, is one that is clear-cut, it's unequivocal, we know what the result is, and we know what the consequences of that result is.
So in terms of it being a binding referendum, will it be a simple majority?
Yeah, that's the nature of referendums, yes. I mean, look, we were very determined to make sure, I was very determined to make sure that this is a yes-no vote. It's very simple, and we know what no means, it's the status quo. We know what yes means, and knowing what yes means we get this draft legislation out. It is like any other legislation. All the questions you'd expect to be answered are in it, the level of regulation, the level of control. People know what they're voting about.
In your press statement today, you asked National Party to commit to respecting the will of the people in terms of the outcome of this vote. What conversations have you had with Simon Bridges or anyone from the National Party about whether they will do that?
Well, I haven't had any conversations specifically about that. The conversations that I've had in passing with national MPs have been along the lines of, not quite sure, we want to see what you're going to do, all that sort of thing. Now, the Cabinet has mandated me to set up a cross-party working group, so I will send out letters to leaders of all parties in Parliament in the next week or so.
Have they even committed to being part of that, Minister?
No, they haven't, no. And, look, I understand this is a political environment, this is a deeply political question. In the end, from the government's point of view, what we want to make sure is that we have a referendum that is well-informed, the voters are well-informed, they're making an informed choice, and we live by the result. But it would be nice if the National Party would confirm what their stance on the result, regardless of what it is, would be.
So have you had conversations about them being involved in the cross-party working group?
As I said, letters will go out next week inviting leaders to send somebody along to be part of that group, and we'll see what comes out.
But you've had no conversations ahead of that?
No, we thought it was the time to set up the working group is once we get to this particular decision. We made some high-level and principal decisions just before Christmas. We've now made this decision about how the format of the question, if you like. We're now going to fill up the content of the draft legislation that we want to put in place. We want to engage with various stakeholders, experts, doctors, scientists, others in the field, those dealing with this issue, to put together the legislation. We would like as many parties as possible to be involved in that, but they're going to have to make that judgment themselves. Just
quickly, are you comfortable with the suggested age of 20 years?
We came to that point. My strong view was there had to be an age an age restriction on it. When you look around at other jurisdictions, it's anywhere between sort of 18 and 21. I know, and I've long had the view and the understanding about the impact of cannabis consumption on young brains. The human brain doesn't complete its development until roughly the mid-20s. We've stated in the paper that went to Cabinet that one of the objectives of any legalisation, if approved by the electorate, would be to, as much as possible, delay first use.
But do you not think it a little...
You can really only do that in a regulated and controlled environment, which is one of the objectives.
Isn't it a bit strange having that set at 20 and alcohol at 18?
They're two different substances. I mean, they're both toxic substances, it is true, but there are things that marijuana can do on the brain that alcohol doesn't do. So, and I think part of the education campaign is explaining that while there are some similarities to these substances, there are also differences, and it's about knowing what the risks of harm are in each case. But in relation to marijuana, knowing that there is the risk of harm and what you do to mitigate that.
Would legalising cannabis in this country be transformational, or would it be a mistake?
Well, in the end, that's going to be the verdict that the 2.9 million voters will get to cast.
I'm asking you, Minister.
Well, other countries have done it. That's not a reason why we should do it, but it is a perennial question that comes up. There have been various attempts at getting the debate going about it. I think until you kind of get it to a crunch point, you don't get to have a decent, thoroughgoing debate. So one of the objectives of this exercise is, by holding a referendum, is that you create the space to get best possible information. I mean, you'll get a lot of rogue.
So would it be transformational or not, legalising? Transformational or a mistake? Which would it be?
Well, that's not my judgment to make. My judgment is, given that there is an arrangement or an agreement between not only two of the parties in government, but now a decision by Cabinet to not only have the referendum, but the way in which it's going to be conducted is to make sure that referendum happens. People will make their judgment about this, about whether it's transformational, about whether they want to even do it. That's a judgment that 2.9 million voters will make. It's not my job to go characterising particular decisions of the electorate.
Have you made up your mind which way you're going to go on it?
Look, I have a view about it. I don't think it helps for me to share my view. In the end, these things are a secret ballot. My job as Minister...
so you don't have the courage of whatever convictions you have to state it publicly?
No, I think it's important, now that it is very clear that the decision is one for 2.9 million voters, is for them to be able to make that decision based on the information that gets put in the public arena. I don't think you need politicians parading around now saying, what their particular view is. This isn't a decision that's going to be made by 20 MPs around a cabinet table or 120 MPs in Parliament. It'll be made by 2.9 million voters.
And that's Justice Minister Andrew Little. So how high is the cannabis referendum on the agenda of voters? We sent Checkpoint reporter Alex Perrottet out to West Auckland to run his own referendum in two different electorates.
We're here at Henderson Mall in Auckland's electorate of Te Atatu, held by Labour's Phil Twyford. He'll most likely compete at the next election against Nationals' Alfred Naro. Now, at the previous election, both of them said they were against the recreational use of cannabis. So, how will locals here vote at the referendum?
I reckon it's great, mate. Yeah, bloody awesome. Yeah. I think, should have done it years ago, bro. Keep people off the streets, bro, and keep people nicely stoned so they're not aggravated running the streets, bro.
I've been off synthetics for about a year and 8 months now, and it's just way better than synthetics. Like, I can still operate, think, maybe not heaps.
Everyone smokes weed in New Zealand, brother. Everyone. It's better than the synthetics, So
you're a big no?
More than no. There's enough drugs and alcohol. So why we want to allow to become more prominent, allow more people to use it, become more acceptable? What's the purpose?
Against it.
What's your main reason?
Because I'm not into drugs.
I think we're just playing with fire, frankly. Most of us in our younger days tried it. I tried it overseas, didn't like it, affected me. Never touched it since.
Oh, I don't know about growing it at home, but I'm all for legalisation. For specific reasons, I suppose, for medical reasons or mental health reasons, things like that, but not sure about the growing it at home.
Do you vote yes or no?
No.
Why?
Because I personally have someone who smokes cannabis and it's not a pretty sight.
So you'll vote no?
No. No.
We're here now at Westgate in the seat of Upper Harbour. It's actually New Zealand's newest electorate. Now, 3 out of every 4 people here are under the age of 50. Many of them will be aware that the seat is held by Nationals' Paula Bennett. She's the opposition's spokesperson on drug reform. So, how are people here going to vote?
Definitely vote yes.
And why is that?
Well, it's been around for a very long time. Of course, we've all had access to it since we're teenagers. It's there. Might as well get some revenue from it.
No,
and
definitely no.
What's your reason?
I just don't agree with it. Don't agree with it at all. And I think it will just cause more problems.
I wouldn't want to go as a public person into a
an eatery or a drinking house and people will be smoking marijuana. I don't like the smell of it. Never have. Never
And
would.
is that your main concern, or are there other concerns you have about legalising it and providing a framework for the broader public to perhaps use it more often and more freely?
I think it does lead to stronger drugs as well. So, yeah, I think it's a stepping stone for people. So that's why I think I'm a little bit against it, yeah.
You got any concerns about marijuana and its wider use?
No, I mean, I guess you're taking away the black market side of things if you legalise it and get the government involved. But no, I think it'd be all right.
So more positives than negatives in having a system?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and in the end, the government probably makes a bit of money out of taxing and stuff anyway. So.
Well, there you have it, a fairly even range of opinion. Was there a generational divide? Well, you can be the judge of that. Certainly lots of young people interested in experimenting with possible legislation. However, on the other side, people very, very concerned that we could be opening ourselves up to a whole range of problems. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
And you can see Alex's piece up on our Facebook page and our website. And Checkpoint has done some pretty informal polling ourselves on social media today. The Twitter poll with 120 votes found 78% in favour of legislation, 22% said no to legalising. And the Facebook poll, 3,400 votes, 85% voted yes to legalising, 15% said no. The family of a New Zealand man killed by pirates off the coast of Panama 5 days ago have been allowed to retrieve their belongings from their yacht. Alan Calverwell's wife and daughter were injured in the attack but managed to lock themselves in a cabin and called for help. The family had been travelling on the yacht for the past 2 years and were making their way back to New Zealand via the Panama Canal at the time. Mr Calverwell's sister, Darren Hughes, told our reporter Matthew Tunison that her brother's wife, who's also called Darren, and their two 11-year-old children just want to come home.
They're working with the authorities in Panama, and there are still some things that have to be signed by Darren, statements, that sort of thing, around the hearings. The children are doing well. It's fantastic. We've got 5 people on the ground from New Zealand there who are supporting the family and helping to make things come together. And obviously they've got to work around what's going to happen with the boat, Aqualobo, and of course their personal effects, etc. I can tell you that today they are taking out some flowers to put onto Aqualobo on behalf of Mum and Dad here in New Zealand. And just to show you how supportive the Panamanian people have been, there were no florists open, and they actually contacted one of the florist owners who came in and opened up the florist so they could sell them some flowers to enable them to do this on behalf of Mum and Dad today.
And have they got clothes and things, or is all their stuff still on the boat?
It is. That's part of what today is about as well, is getting access to the boat and taking off their personal effects that they need to keep with them. Some dear friends of them took the 2 children out the other day and bought them a new outfit because literally they'd been living in the clothes that they had on.
And are you able to tell me about the injuries to Darren and the daughter?
Darren received a machete injury to the upper arm and shoulder area, and she has had 36 stitches internally and externally. It was a very deep wound. Her daughter did receive a blow to the head and the hand. She was struck with, my understanding is, with the handle of the machete, and she has been thoroughly checked out, and everything is okay, apart from the fact that it's very sore. Very brave young children.
And that's Darren Hughes, whose brother Alan Culverwell was killed in Panama. 3 men have been charged in connection with the attack and are being held in custody. Across the Tasman now, and the Australian Prime Minister copped an egg to the head from a disgruntled voter during a campaign stop in southern New South Wales. A 25-year-old woman has been arrested and charged with common assault as well as possessing cannabis and will appear in court later this month. The incident surprisingly occurred in the safe seat for the Liberals at an event organised by the Country Women's Association. In poll results released yesterday, Labor's primary vote has dropped, but it's still slightly ahead of the coalition on a 2-party preferred basis. The ABC's Tom Iggulden is out on the campaign trail.
A protester approached the Prime Minister during an informal meet and greet session after today's well-attended CWA event. The egg appeared to bounce off Scott Morrison, but an elderly woman was knocked off her chair and onto the ground as security staff moved in to eject the protester. Mr Morrison then helped the woman up.
You okay? We'll give you a bit of a shock.
It's all right.
You okay?
Thank you.
It's all right, you'll be all right. Just got to steady. Maybe all the cameras could just back off a bit, okay?
Yeah.
He later tweeted a vow to stand up to thuggery and people he described as idiots who invade farms. The protester spoke briefly to the media outside the event.
Did you intend for an older woman to fall over as well? No, that was not my intent. I am sorry.
The drama unfolded as the Prime Minister attempts to shore up support for Liberal Junior Minister Susan Lee, who holds the seat of Farrer by a margin of 20%. But a strong vote for the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party in the recent New South Wales state election has the coalition fretting the seat could be under threat. Scott Morrison spoke with ABC Albury local radio presenter Bronwyn O'Shea ahead of his CWA appearance to spruik Susan Lee's credentials.
She's such a strong voice for rural and regional Australia. She's fearless.
But are you concerned about this so-called rise of independents?
No, I think what matters is that you have your members who listen carefully to their community.
Scott Morrison ending that report from Tom Iggulden. Community organisers have come together in Porirua to make homes healthier for kids in what's believed to be a first for New Zealand. The Porirua East Housing Project brings together local community organisations in a bid to get homes healthier quickly and to monitor them to make sure it's making kids healthier. 20 homes are part of the trial, a mix of privately owned houses, rentals and state houses. The families were referred to the project because their children have been in hospital with respiratory illnesses in the past 6 months. Laura Dooney explains.
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Opal.
Builders arrive at Opal Iato Piniata's house, sent there as part of the initiative that she and her family were referred to after her 2-year-old Savan ended up in hospital.
Savan went in, I think, around August to October last year. She went into to hospital with what we thought was bronchiolitis and it ended up being pneumonia. She ended up having a stint for a day in ICU, and that's pretty much the reason why we got referred to the Warm Housing Project.
The family of 5 bought the former state house in Porirua in 2015, but couldn't afford to make it warm and dry. When they moved in, the 4-bedroom house had no heating, the insulation wasn't up to code, and the house was cold and damp. Now the insulation is fixed and heat pumps have been installed. As we talk, builders come into the home to start fixing gaps between the door and windows. Already Savan is much healthier.
She's less sick at the moment. There's an improvement in her symptoms, so it's not as lengthy, her illnesses, compared to previously. Yeah, I'd have to take a week off work and now it's just a couple of days.
Brian Berry works at the Porirua Union and Community Health Service in Cannons Creek, which helped with the referrals. He's seen firsthand what cold and damp homes do to children's health. The common problems we see, especially with children, are respiratory illnesses, flus, colds, lower respiratory tract infections, asthma, pneumonias. Dr. Berry says while it's great 20 homes will be warmer and drier soon, there are many more that need fixing in Porirua. And there's 2 major housing groups in East Porirua. One is the Housing New Zealand homes, which have been through a reasonably active program of trying to insulate and trying to heat. The other are the private homes or private rental homes, which need work. So it is a very small number in terms of the problem that's out there. Dr. Berry says it often only takes some insulation, heating and stopped-up drafts. And it's frustrating such simple fixes aren't being done on a larger scale. Tu Ora Compass Health's Rane Wanera Parai says lots of babies from East Porirua get admitted to hospital for illnesses that should be avoidable.
We thought if we could identify some of those whānau with children in hospital and then get them a warm home assessment and then be able to have some resource to put the recommendations from the warm home assessment in place, it would make a difference to the health of those babies.
The initiative is funded by Hatmana Charitable Trust, which donated $125,000 to top up government funding. The Sustainability Trust and Well Homes, run by Wellington's Regional Public Health Service, are also involved. Ms Wanera Parai says the next step is to roll the initiative out across the region, and she hopes the government is sitting up and taking notice of how simple it can be to make a home healthier. In Wellington for Checkpoint, ko Laura Dooney tēnei.
And we've had a mixed bag on the cannabis referendum. Lots of feedback here. This listener says that, it's Graham, he says, before eligible listeners vote on the cannabis referendum, perhaps they should consider a recent report from Oxford University that concluded cannabis use in adolescents increases the risk of mental illness, notably depression and suicide. We are currently debating the rise of mental illness in New Zealand, yet the government appear to possibly support a drug that may increase the disease. Proponents of cannabis use do not mention this disturbing finding. Andrew from Christchurch says he'll be voting yes, but he has concerns about big business promoting cannabis. On our interview with this illegal drug grower, this person says he's an amoral Robin Hood. Tax evasion, benefit fraud, and God forbid, what effect does he think he's had on his kids? Bill, on the other hand, says wonderful interview with the nice man growing marijuana. He came across as a very decent, good person. This listener says, though, the cannabis referendum is a waste of time. Why can't the government get on with governing and dealing with the real issues facing this country? What a colossal waste of energy when doctors and teachers are screaming out for attention and the entire business sector is in free-for-all. And Jeanette says, interview was gold. I love that people with conviction should be given the licences because they have the prerequisite skills and experience. That guy should be on the select committee when the bill goes through its process. However, Mark says he's got no medical expertise. Thanks for joining us. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government says the referendum on legalising cannabis will be binding because the draft legislation will be ready to go if there is a yes vote. Senior doctors say medical staff will be pleased the Waikato District Health Board is being replaced by a commissioner. 2 journalists in Myanmar sentenced to 7 years in jail in a case that sparked an international outcry have been released after less than a year. The woman whose husband was killed in a pirate attack off Panama received a deep machete wound in the attack, and her 11-year-old daughter was also injured. And a group marched through Wellington today, calling on the government to give its drug buying agency more funding. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7 o'clock.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Israeli Independence Day is coming up, Memorial Day, and then you have the Eurovision Song Contest, all kinds of reasons why Israel doesn't want a war.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your